Mae Hart stood trial for murder with blood on her hands, and 5 words in her defense. He came into my room. The judge called for her death, until the man she once saved returned to do the same for her. The dirt outside the saloon hadn't settled yet, still stirred by the boots of folks who had come running when the shot rang out. But they didn't run to help, they ran to watch. Mae Hart stood in the middle of the street, blood soaking her hands, dripping slow from her fingers like it wasn't hers to hold. The sheriff's body lay sprawled at her feet, his badge glinting sharp under the sun, a pistol still gripped in his dead hand. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dust caked into the hem, and her face was the kind that made people uncomfortable, not because it was ugly, but because it was empty. Like all the fire in her had gone cold. She didn't speak when they came for her, didn't fight when Deputy Collins grabbed her by the wrist, his face pale and sweating. Someone shouted for the undertaker. Someone else said it plain. That Hart girl's gone and killed the law. No one asked why. No one bent down to check if maybe, just maybe, there had been a reason. Because in a town like Dry Creek, some lives already came with the verdict written. They hauled her into the jail, slammed the iron door shut behind her, and left her sitting on the cot, staring at the blood on her palms like it was something she'd never seen before. Collins paced outside her cell, muttering to himself, wiping his hands again and again on his vest. Mae didn't flinch when the door opened again and the judge strode in, coat still dusted from his ride, eyes already narrowed. He looked at the body in the back room, then at Mae, then back again, and sighed, like he was tired of it all before it even began. The sun dropped low, painting the walls of her cell with orange light. Someone brought food, stale bread and cold beans, but she didn't touch it. The blood had dried by then, thick under her fingernails, sticky on her wrists. She sat still, not praying, not weeping, just waiting, like she already knew there was only one way this would go. Outside, word spread faster than wildfire. Women whispered behind curtains, children peered from behind fence posts. Men gathered in silence, spitting tobacco and watching the jailhouse like it might catch fire. Nobody mentioned her sister, Ruth. Nobody talked about the last time the sheriff had cornered a girl who couldn't scream loud enough. They just said Mae was trouble, always had been. Riding too fast, speaking too sharp, not knowing her place. But Bo McKenna heard the shot too. He'd been breaking a wild Mustang on the South Ridge when the echo reached him, and when he heard the name, Mae Hart, he didn't curse, didn't shake his head. He saddled his horse and rode hard toward town, dust chasing him like a storm, because Bo remembered her different, not wild, not broken. Just the girl who once stitched his side after a bar fight gone wrong, who rode like wind and laughed like thunder, and who disappeared the day her sister did. And when he reached that jailhouse and saw her through the bars, blood on her skin and nothing in her eyes, something inside him twisted hard. Because he knew she hadn't just killed a man. She'd killed something darker. And now the town was ready to hang her for it. The courtroom smelled of dust, sweat, and something sour, like spilled liquor soaked into the wood. Sunlight slanted through high windows, cutting across the floor in golden stripes, but it didn't warm the room. Folks filled the benches like it was a show, whispering behind gloved hands, hats held on laps, boots tapping out quiet judgment. Mae sat alone at the defendant's table, wrists cuffed, ankles chained, shoulders straight but tired. Her hair hung in tangles and the blood had been scrubbed off, but it still lingered in the cracks of her fingernails, like it refused to forget. The judge was a traveling one from Carson City, a man named Templeton, known more for his speed than his fairness. He walked in carrying a thick black book and a folded paper with Mae's name already written in ink. He didn't look at her when he sat, just nodded for the trial to begin, as if everything that mattered had already been decided on the ride over. They called a few witnesses. Deputy Collins swore Mae had a wild look in her eye when she pulled the trigger. Mrs. Langston from the bakery said she'd always been a troubled girl, always wandering about with that sister of hers, whispering secrets like they were spells. Mr. Avery from the bank said he once saw Mae yelling at the sheriff on the edge of town, red-faced and shaking, but couldn't hear what about. No one mentioned Ruth. No one asked why the sheriff had been in Mae's room to begin with. When the judge finally turned to her, eyebrows arched like he was giving her a gift instead of a sentence, he said, "You got 20 minutes, Miss Hart. Use 'em well." Mae stood slow. The chains at her ankles clinked when she moved, and for a moment the room fell quiet. She didn't cry, didn't plead. Just lifted her chin and said, "He came into my room." That was it. 5 words. Cold, clear, like stone. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not the kind that come from horror, but the kind that come from offense, from a woman speaking what should have stayed unspoken. A few ladies turned their heads. Some men snorted. The judge didn't blink. "Is that your defense?" he asked. Mae nodded once. He looked down at his paper, then at the sheriff's badge, resting on the table like it still had power. He raised the gavel and brought it down with a crack that echoed through the silence like a bone snapping. "Guilty. Sentence is death by hanging. At dawn." No one wept. No one stood up in protest. The gallery emptied with the slow shuffling of boots, the murmuring of mouths hungry for something to tell over supper. Mae didn't move. She stared at the wooden floor and swallowed once, as if that final word, dawn, had lodged in her throat. Outside, Bo McKenna leaned against a post, jaw clenched tight, watching the people file out with faces blank or satisfied. He didn't go in. Not yet. But he watched the window of the courtroom until the last face disappeared, and only Mae was left, alone in a room full of judgment. He reached for the reins of his horse and whispered low, "Not if I can help it," then swung into the saddle, his mind already running faster than his boots could carry. Because he knew what truth cost in Dry Creek, and he was done watching good people hang for speaking it. Bo McKenna didn't take a seat in the courtroom that morning. He stood in the back, leaning against the wall with his hat pressed low and his fists curled tight at his sides. His boots stayed planted, unmoving, like roots digging into the floorboards. He wasn't the kind of man to show his feelings, but anyone who looked close enough could see it in the way his jaw locked and his shoulders tensed every time someone said Mae's name like it was poison. He had heard about the shooting from a ranch hand who passed him on the trail, words falling out of the man's mouth like gossip he couldn't wait to spread. Hart girl shot the sheriff, right in the chest, dropped him dead. Bo had ridden hard into town after that, the kind of hard that made your horse sweat foam and your own heart forget how to settle. And now, standing there in that hot, silent room, he watched Mae take the verdict without blinking, without begging, like she was made of something tougher than skin. She hadn't changed much, not really. Her hair was still that wild tangle she never bothered to braid, and her eyes still held storms, though now they looked hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out the light. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since Ruth vanished and Mae packed up what little she had and rode out without saying goodbye. Bo remembered her back then, fire in her voice, always ready to bet high and laugh loud, riding bareback across the pasture like she was born with hooves instead of feet. She could outdrink most of the hands and beat all of them at cards. And when she smiled at him across the table, he'd forgotten how to breathe. But she was gone too quick, and when she left, she took something with her he hadn't figured out how to name. And now she was back, only to be sentenced before the dust even settled. Bo hadn't believed it at first. Mae Hart, murderer? It didn't make sense. Until he saw her standing there, hands cuffed, shoulders drawn up like a fighter, waiting for the next hit. Then it made too much sense. Because this town had a way of turning on people like Mae, girls who didn't bend easy, who didn't keep quiet, who looked judges in the eye and said 5 words that stripped the paint off the walls. He came into my room, and nobody believed her. Bo did. He didn't need details, didn't need a tearful story. He'd seen enough. Seen the way the sheriff used to look at Ruth, that too long stare, the sneer behind his smile. He remembered the night Mae showed up at the ranch after Ruth went missing, dirt on her dress and fire in her eyes, asking if anyone had seen her sister. She'd been brushed off then too. Just another girl making noise. But Bo had heard it, and now, with the whole town watching her like she was a ghost already halfway gone, he made a choice. He didn't look away. didn't join the whispers or shift in his boots like the rest of them. He watched her walk out in chains, and when the door shut behind her, something in him turned solid. Mae didn't kill for power or anger. She killed because no one else had the guts to stop the man who had taken too much for too long. Bo stepped out into the sunlight, jaw tight, heart thudding like hooves on dry earth. If they were going to hang her, they'd have to reckon with him first. Because if Mae was going to die, it wasn't going to be alone, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be quiet. Bo didn't knock when he pushed into the jailhouse. He just stepped through the door, the heat of the afternoon still clinging to his back, dust curling off his boots. Deputy Collins looked up from behind the desk, chewing on a toothpick like it was his job. He opened his mouth to send Bo away, but Bo beat him to it. "I'm here to see Mae Hart." Collins scoffed, leaned back in his chair and said, "Ain't no visitors allowed." Bo didn't move. He reached slowly for the buttons of his shirt, pulled it open, and turned slightly to the side. There, just below his ribs, ran a faded scar, thin and jagged, like a bolt of lightning caught in skin. "She stitched me up once, rode 10 miles in the dark for help, kept me awake till the doc came. Said I owed her nothing, but I figure I do." The deputy shifted in his seat, the weight of the memory pressing down between them. He'd been there that night, seen Bo come back soaked in blood from a rustler's ambush, half dead and mumbling her name. Finally, Collins stood, grabbed the ring of keys from the wall, and said, "5 minutes." Bo followed him past the holding rooms and into the back where the cells stood in a row like broken teeth. Mae sat on the cot, her back to the bars, hair pulled low over her face. The cell was dim, the only light coming from a small window where the dust motes floated like tired ghosts. Collins unlocked the gate and let Bo step in, then locked it behind him with a warning glance. Mae didn't turn when he entered. She didn't move at all, just said, flat and quiet, "You shouldn't be here." But when she finally looked over her shoulder, her eyes said something else. They weren't cold, just tired, like someone who had carried a weight too long and forgot how to set it down. Bo took off his hat, held it in both hands, and sat on the edge of the cot across from her. "I heard," he said. Mae looked at him, her jaw tight. "Bet you did. Everyone has." "I don't believe them," Bo said, voice steady. "I believe you." She let out a breath through her nose, almost a laugh but not quite. "Doesn't matter, Bo. They already decided." "It matters to me," he said, and then added, softer, "I know what he did. I knew it when Ruth went missing. You said she was scared, and nobody listened." Mae's face didn't change, but her hands curled in her lap, fingers pressing into her palms. Bo wanted to reach out, to take them, but he didn't. Not yet. "I'm not here to fix everything," he said. "I just want to do what I can." "You can't stop the rope," she whispered, eyes fixed on the stone floor. "Judge's orders. Dawn." Bo leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low but firm. "Then I guess I better get started before the sun comes up." Mae looked at him then, really looked. There was something like hope flickering there, small and stubborn, like an ember under ash. She didn't thank him, didn't smile. Just sat quiet beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel like a dead woman waiting. She felt like maybe someone still saw her, still believed she wasn't what they said, and that, just for a moment, was enough. The night crept slow through the bars, shadows stretching long across the jailhouse floor. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock and the distant thud of horses in the livery yard. Bo stayed where he was, sitting beside Mae on the edge of that hard cot, his hat forgotten on the floor, his body still as stone. He didn't speak, not yet. He knew she'd start when she was ready. And when she did, she didn't look at him. "It was Ruth first," Mae said quietly, voice flat like she'd practiced saying it without breaking. "She was just 16. Sweet, too sweet for a place like this. Always saw the best in folks, even in him." Bo didn't move, just listened. Mae's eyes stayed fixed on the cracks in the stone wall. "She went to the sheriff for help, said someone was following her. He told her to come back at night when it was quiet, said he'd protect her. I told her not to go. I begged her, but she went anyway. Said he was the law." Mae's voice cracked there. The first crack she let show. She never came back. Next morning her room was empty. Her things still folded like she meant to return. I looked for her. Asked questions. Folks got real quiet. Real polite. Told me maybe Ruth had run off with some cowboy. But she wouldn't have. She was scared. I know what scared looks like. Beau's fists curled in his lap. He didn't interrupt. Didn't need to. Mae kept going. The words tumbling out now, like once they started she couldn't stop. I went to him. The sheriff. Asked what he knew. He just laughed. Said girls like Ruth always find trouble. Said maybe I should learn from her mistakes before I ended up the same. She swallowed hard. Then he started looking at me the way he used to look at her. She finally turned to Beau then, her eyes raw, hollowed out from years of silence. It went on for months. Long nights, locked doors, bruises I couldn't explain. And no one said a damn thing. Not the preacher. Not the mayor. Not the women in town who looked at me like I asked for it. Everyone knew. They just didn't want to know. Beau's jaw was tight enough to crack, but he stayed quiet, only nodding once to show he was still with her. I tried to leave, Mae said. Twice. First time he sent Collins to drag me back, said I was under investigation for theft. Second time, he followed me out to the edge of town, said if I ran, Ruth's name would never come off his books. Said he'd tell everyone she was just a runaway whore. Her voice dropped. So I stayed. Until yesterday. She looked down at her hands, at the memory of blood. I didn't plan it. He came into my room again. Same as always. Only this time, I had a gun under the bed. My daddy's old revolver. He laughed when he saw it. Said I didn't have it in me. She looked up at Beau now. I guess I did. The silence after was heavy. Beau stared ahead for a long time, chest rising slow, shoulders rigid. Then he stood, picked up his hat, and said steady and low, "We ain't letting them hang you for killing a monster." Mae looked away, her voice soft. "They already are." But Beau just stepped closer, his hand brushing her shoulder, warm and sure. "Not if I have anything to say about it." And for the first time in a long while, Mae believed he just might. Beau rode out before the rooster crowed, before the sun had even cracked the hills. The town still slept, quiet and unaware, but Beau's heart was already racing, beating like hoofbeats in his chest. He didn't look back, just leaned into the saddle and let his horse carry him west. The trail dry and rough beneath them, dust rising in clouds that clung to his coat like smoke. He wasn't running. He was hunting, and he knew exactly what he was looking for. He rode hard all day, switching horses at a relay station just past Silver Ridge, barely stopping long enough to take a sip from his canteen. He followed stories like a bloodhound, chasing whispers through saloons and kitchens, asking questions folks didn't want to answer. Most turned away, mumbled they didn't know anything, didn't want to get involved. But Beau wasn't the kind of man to stop just because doors stayed shut. By the time he reached Reno, his face was streaked with trail dust and sweat, his eyes bloodshot from too many hours with no sleep. He headed straight for the back alleys, the kind of places where truth got buried beneath perfume and piano music. He found her on the second try, a madam named Nellie Drake who ran a place with red curtains and tired girls who smiled without their eyes. She was older now, her once golden hair graying at the temples, but Beau remembered her from the old days, back when she passed through Dry Creek peddling perfume and secrets. When he said Ruth Hart's name, Nellie stilled. "Pretty girl," she said softly. "Too sweet for a place like mine." Came in scared, bruises on her neck, didn't talk much, said she had to hide. Beau leaned forward, his voice low. "You remember who brought her to you?" Nellie looked away. "I do. Sheriff from your town. Rode in with her like he was doing me a favor. Said she was trouble, but I'd get good money if I kept her quiet. She ran off after 2 weeks. Left a note. Said if he found her again, she'd rather die." Beau swallowed hard. "Can you write that down?" Nellie nodded. "You think it'll matter?" "I think it's all that matters," he said. She gave him more than a note. She gave names. 3 other girls who'd come through just like Ruth, all scared, all from places near Dry Creek. Beau wrote it all down, every word. folded it into his coat like scripture. He didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the corner of a boarding room with a revolver on his lap and Mae's voice echoing in his head. He rode back at first light, heart pounding harder with every mile. But as Dry Creek came into view, something cold pressed into his gut. Because he knew this town, knew how it liked things neat and quiet. Bringing the truth home wasn't going to save Mae. It was going to start a fire. Still, he rode straight into town like a storm, coat flapping, eyes sharp, a letter clutched in one hand and fury in the other. He wasn't here to ask. He wasn't here to beg. He was here to make them look at what they'd ignored. And if they still chose the rope, then at least they'd know exactly what kind of man they were hanging her for killing. They built the gallows in the dark, lanterns swinging from posts, shadows long and crooked across the square. The wood was already cut, stacked behind the jailhouse like it had been waiting. Men moved quiet, not speaking, the way folks do at a funeral when they know the body's still warm. Each nail hammered into place echoed down the street, sharp and slow, like they were sealing a coffin instead of raising a frame. By the time the sky turned gray, the noose was hanging from the crossbeam, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Inside the jail, Mae sat on the cot, combing her fingers through her tangled hair. Collins had given her a brush, said nothing, just set it through the bars, and walked off like he didn't want to be near her when the sun came up. She didn't thank him. She didn't touch the brush either. Just used her fingers, pulling out the knots one by one, then splitting the strands into 3 parts and weaving them together. Her hands were steady, not fast, not slow, just sure. Like she'd done it 100 times before. She'd braided her hair the day they buried Ruth, too. Outside, the preacher practiced his scripture under his breath, pacing the wooden steps of the church. He held a worn Bible in one hand, thumb tucked inside the page he'd read so many times it didn't mean much anymore. He didn't want to look at the gallows, but he did, every few steps. Like the noose might change shape if he turned his back too long. The judge sat in his quarters above the bank, his coat off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He sipped whiskey from a glass that rattled in his grip. His eyes were bloodshot, but he wasn't drunk. Just tired. Tired and mean. He stared out the window like he was waiting for dawn to do the dirty work he couldn't finish with a gavel. Mae finished her braid and tied it with a scrap of cloth she'd pulled from her pocket. Her boots were already laced. Her dress was torn at the hem, but clean. She had asked for water the night before and washed herself with it in the cell as best she could. It wasn't vanity. It was control. If they were going to hang her, she'd meet death on her own terms. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't scared, but because she had already buried that part of herself in the weeks after Ruth disappeared, back when no one listened, back when she knocked on every door in town and got only cold stares and shut mouths. She had mourned then, grieved not just for her sister, but for the part of herself that believed the world might ever be fair. Now all that was left was the weight. The birds began to sing, soft and uncertain, as if even they didn't want to be heard that morning. A wagon creaked past the saloon, wheels loud on the stone. And somewhere, a bell rang once, sharp and lonely. Mae stood slowly, brushed the wrinkles from her dress, and walked to the bars. She looked out at the square, at the half-lit gallows, at the crowd beginning to gather with faces drawn and empty. She didn't pray. She'd done that already too. Once, long ago, when she thought justice came with badges and sermons. Now she just waited, hands folded calm, as if she were the one holding court. And if fear crept in around the edges, she didn't let it show. Because they could take her body, they could swing her from a rope like she was nothing, but they couldn't take the truth. That had already left the jail and was riding hard beneath a dust-worn hat, on a horse bound for fire. Beau stood in the center of the square, with the morning light cutting sharp across his face. Dust clung to his coat, his boots, even his breath. He held the letter in one hand, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded so many times, and in the other he gripped a ledger, names, places, dates, all tied to girls like Ruth, who had disappeared or run or been given away like broken things. He'd ridden all night for this moment, heart burning with the weight of what he knew. But the town around him didn't care for fire. They gathered slow, sleepy-eyed and curious, drawn to the gallows like they were watching a storm that wasn't theirs. Women clutched their shawls tighter, men crossed their arms and leaned on hitching posts, not a soul daring to speak. Beau's voice cut through the hush, rough and steady, the kind of voice that doesn't rise with anger but with purpose. He didn't yell, he didn't beg, he just told the truth. He said Mae didn't murder an innocent man, she stopped a monster. Said the sheriff had done it before, would have done it again. He read Ruth's name, then the others, Caroline Hicks, vanished from Carson Wells. June Miller, last seen at a station near Silver Ridge. He read the madam's letter aloud, voice steady even as his throat tightened. The words were ugly, but they were real. And when he finished, he looked out at the crowd and asked one thing. Did any of you ever wonder why so many girls left town and never came back? Silence followed. Not the kind that comes from shame, the kind that comes from fear. No one moved, no one nodded. They just looked away, down at their boots, up at the sky, anywhere but at him. Beau felt the hope in his chest flicker, until he heard it. A voice, small but clear. She came to me. The crowd turned. Miss Ellie, the schoolteacher, stood just beyond the fountain, her hand trembling as it clutched her satchel. She wasn't known for noise, a quiet woman with soft shoes and a soft heart. But now her eyes were fierce behind the wire rims of her glasses. Ruth came to me, she said louder now. A week before she vanished. She had a bruise on her jaw and scratches down her arm. Said she was scared, said she didn't know who else to trust. I told her to go home and rest. I thought it'd be fine. Her voice broke, but I was wrong. The silence cracked like ice. One voice. That's all it took. A man near the bakery shifted and spoke low. My niece left town after the sheriff came asking after her. We never saw her again. Another woman raised her chin. He cornered my daughter behind the church 2 years back. She never said what happened, just wouldn't speak for weeks. One by one, the stories came, quiet and broken and real. The kind that had lived behind locked doors and closed mouths, now spilling out under the weight of what Mae had done and what Beau had carried back. The judge, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched with a face carved in stone, but even he couldn't stop what had started. The dam had cracked. Beau's voice dropped low, like a vow. You let her hang, and you're not just burying a girl, you're burying every truth this town has tried to forget. And for the first time since the gallows had been raised, the noose hanging high and waiting, the people of Dry Creek looked at each other, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something like shame. And maybe that was enough to begin. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the square where the gallows loomed like a second courthouse. The air had thickened with voices, names, stories, truths that had no place to hide anymore. People still stood in clusters, uncertain, glancing to one another as if asking silently what came next. The judge stood on the small platform outside the bank, arms crossed, lips thin as thread. His black coat flared in the wind like a crow stretching its wings. He listened as they came forward, Miss Ellie with her shaking hands, the old baker with his faded memory of a niece, the stable boy who remembered seeing Ruth crying behind the barn. More than a dozen voices now, all of them quiet, all of them true. And when they fell silent, when every throat was dry and the air hung with waiting, the judge stepped forward and placed his palm flat on the podium. This isn't a town meeting, he said, voice sharp and clipped. This isn't a trial. Justice has already been served. Beau stood at the front of the crowd, arms loose at his sides, hat gripped in one hand, dust from the trail still caked in his hair. His jaw was clenched, but his voice came out steady, like a slow river that couldn't be stopped. She didn't get a trial, he said. She got a sentence. The judge's eyes flicked to him. I heard her words. She confessed. She said he came into her room. That's not a confession. That's a warning. The judge slammed his fist down hard, the sound cracking across the boards like a gunshot. This is not a court of opinion, he barked. It is the law. And the sentence stands. Hang at dawn. Bo didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just stepped forward, one slow step at a time, until he was close enough for the judge to see the wear on his face, the lines that hadn't been there yesterday, the fire that hadn't gone out during the ride, or the silence, or the shouting. "Then you'll have to kill me too," Bo said, calm, certain, like he was offering something as simple as his name. A murmur ran through the crowd, low and uneasy, the kind of sound that said maybe things had gone too far to be ignored. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Don't be foolish, McKenna." Bo didn't move. "She saved my life once, rode through a storm, stitched me up herself, never asked for anything, just did it because it was right. Now I'm doing the same. Because hanging her for killing the man who destroyed her, that ain't justice. That's cowardice hiding behind law." The silence that followed was different. Not quiet like fear, quiet like something had just shifted in the bones of the town. People looked to the judge, but his jaw was tight, his face unreadable. Then a voice from the back said, "He's right." Another voice. Then another. A ripple turning into a wave. The judge looked out at them, suddenly small in his black coat and fancy words, and for the first time, he didn't answer. He just stepped back from the podium, lips pressed into a hard line, the law no longer heavy enough to drown out the truth. And Bo stayed where he stood, the dust swirling around his boots, waiting, not for permission, but for the rope to come down. The morning light touched everything like it was trying to soften what was about to happen, but there was no gentleness in the gallows. The wood creaked with the weight of waiting. The noose swung slightly, catching the breeze like a whisper of things unsaid. The crowd had gathered again, not as loud as before, not whispering either. They stood in a silence that felt more like prayer than curiosity, faces drawn, some pale, some hard. Mae climbed the steps without being pushed. Her braid hung long down her back, the end still tied with the same cloth from the night before. She didn't wear shoes. She didn't ask for mercy. The preacher stood to her left, hands shaking slightly as he held his Bible, eyes darting anywhere but at her face. The judge stood further off, his jaw tight, arms crossed, like maybe if he stayed rigid enough, the guilt wouldn't get in. Mae didn't ask for a blindfold, didn't speak. She just stood there, hands at her sides, chin lifted, eyes fixed on something beyond the rooftops, beyond the hills, maybe even beyond the life that was about to end. She didn't cry. That part of her was long gone. What lived in her now was something tougher, something made of all the nights no one listened, all the mornings she woke and Ruth didn't. The executioner stepped forward, an older man with eyes that looked sorry but hands that kept moving. He slipped the rope over her head, adjusted it at her throat, then stepped back, breath caught in his chest. He turned slightly, looking first to the judge, then to the crowd, then, finally, to Bo. Bo stood by the stairs, close but not close enough. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, blood seeping from his knuckles, dirt on his face. He met the executioner's eyes and gave no signal, no plea. Just stood there, waiting. The executioner hesitated. Then he pulled the lever. There was a sound like thunder, wood snapping, rope stretching. But the rope didn't hold. Mae fell, and instead of the crack of death, there was the soft thud of arms catching her. Bo had cut it. He had slipped under the platform while the crowd gathered, found the hinge, found the rope, and with his own blade and bleeding hands, sawed through it until only a sliver remained. When the lever dropped, the rope gave way, snapping above the knot, and Mae tumbled down like an angel cast from a sky too cruel to keep her. She hit his chest hard, knocking the wind from him, and for a moment neither moved. Then Mae opened her eyes, gasping, clutching the front of his shirt like she didn't know what was real anymore. Bo just held her, tight and sure, heart thudding against hers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. The judge shouted something, but it was drowned in the sudden wave of voices rising all around. Bo stood, still holding Mae, and turned to face them all. "She's not dying today," he said, voice like gravel, loud and calm. "Not while I'm still breathing." And the town, already cracked open by truth, now stood at the edge of something new, something dangerous, something right. And Mae, still pressed against the man who caught her, felt something stronger than terror rise in her chest. She felt alive. They didn't stop to look back. Not when the crowd started shouting, not when the judge's voice cracked the air like a whip, not even when gunshots rang out. Wild, panicked, harmless. Bo had Mae in his arms and a fire in his chest, and that was all that mattered. He carried her down the gallows steps, through the gap in the crowd that opened without a word, and onto his horse waiting in the alley, saddled and restless. They rode hard. Not far. Just enough to disappear for a while. Enough to find a place where no one said her name like a curse or watched her like she was something to be burned clean. The river was wide and fast, with trees that bent low to shield the bank. Bo found a patch of earth soft enough for a fire, dry enough to keep the cold from settling in her bones. He dismounted first, helped her down like she might break. She didn't speak, just gripped his shoulder a little too long, like her hands hadn't caught up to the fact she was still alive. He set to work in silence, building a fire, laying out his bedroll for her to sit on, digging through his pack for whatever cloth he hadn't used on the trail. Her wrists were red and torn from the noose, skin raw where the rope had burned her. Bo washed them slow with water from the river, then wrapped them tight, careful not to wince even when she did. He said nothing about the blood, the bruises, the cut on her lip, just moved steady and quiet, like he was fixing something precious. Mae sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, watching the flames catch, the heat rise. Her eyes looked heavy but awake, too awake, like every sound cracked through her. She stared at the bruises on her arms, the dirt on her dress. The man crouched beside her, with hands strong enough to save her, and gentle enough to bandage what was left. "You're going to be hunted," she said finally, her voice rough, more ash than air. Bo didn't flinch, just nodded, eyes on the fire. "Only by cowards." That pulled a breath out of her. Not a laugh, not quite, but something close to remembering how. "You could have let it happen," she said. "You could have walked away." Bo leaned back, tossed another branch into the fire. "So could you. All those nights. You stayed. You fought." Mae looked away, the river humming nearby like a song only the earth remembered. "I was just trying to survive." Bo turned his head, met her eyes. "So am I." They sat there, smoke rising around them, the wind brushing through the tall grass like a mother smoothing hair. The river kept moving, like time, like forgiveness. And for the first time in too long, Mae didn't feel like prey. She felt like someone who'd made it past the worst thing. Someone whose story hadn't ended on a platform beneath a swaying rope. She watched Bo reach for his saddlebag, pull out a flask and offer it to her. She took it, drank, coughed, smiled just a little. He grinned back, crooked and quiet, the kind of smile that said they might not be safe, but they were free. And for now, that was enough. They never returned to Dry Creek, not even once. The town they left behind kept on just the same, dust blowing through its streets, men tipping their hats to lies they'd lived with too long. But something shifted there, quiet and deep, like water soaking into dry earth. Stories spread as they always do, changing a little each time, carried by stagecoach drivers and trading post whispers. They said the sheriff's badge had been buried in a shallow grave with no ceremony. Said the judge never sat the bench again. Said a gallows stood empty and sun-bleached until it finally rotted and collapsed on its own. But the one they told most often was about the girl who was hanged and lived, about the rope that didn't hold, about the rancher who caught her before the ground did. Some called it a miracle. Others called it madness. Either way, it was truth, the kind that couldn't be buried, no matter how deep the shame. Bo and Mae found a place far from the eyes of men, a crooked cabin near a valley that felt untouched by time, where the grass grew long and wild horses roamed through it like ghosts. The trees leaned in like old friends, the river hummed steady, and the wind carried nothing but birdsong and pine. There were no roads leading in, only trails known by heart, carved by hooves and footsteps over days and seasons. They didn't speak much of what happened. Not at first. The bruises faded. The nightmares took longer. Some nights Mae would wake, with a gasp, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. But Bo would already be there, hand on her back, breath steady and close. He never asked her to forget. He never asked her to move on. He just stayed. Mae kept her braid long, tied it with the same scrap of cloth from the jailhouse. Each morning she sat on the porch and plaited it with fingers that had once clenched in fear, now steady with the quiet work of living. She planted beans and sunflowers, patched the holes in Bo's shirts, and carved a spoon out of a piece of driftwood just to see if she could. Bo built a corral for the wildest of the horses, not to break them, just to give them space to rest. He fixed the roof that first summer, cleared the stream bed when it flooded in spring, and every evening he sat beside Mae on that same porch, the sky stretched out like a blanket above them. They didn't marry. Didn't need to. What they had wasn't a promise made with words. It was in the way she handed him his coffee before he asked. In the way he leaned his rifle by the door and reached for her hand instead. The world moved on without them. Towns grew. Trails shifted. But the story stayed. The girl who was hanged and lived. The man who wouldn't let go. And somewhere, in a valley no map ever marked, that story breathed. Mae smiled more now. Not always, but enough. Enough to know she wasn't broken. She hadn't been saved. She had been believed. And that was the difference. Because love, real love, doesn't always ride in with a gun or a ring. Sometimes it rides through hell and never stops until the person you care for is free. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ride with us through more tales where justice, love, and courage collide.